And hello. This video isn't so much a typical video of the style that I've been making recently. Instead, it's the start of a new series. And what the series is I'm going to be taking games and supplements from older times and examining them, both the basic story and the lore, to see if there's anything we can take away from them and what we should leave behind. And we're going to start it off with Spelljammer. Now, Spelljammer was one of two settings in the 90s whose whole purpose was world hopping. Now, many of you may have heard of Planescape because of the game Planescape Torment. That dealt with going to the outer planes or the inner planes, realms with different laws of physics, realms where belief was more important than actual tangible laws of physics. Spelljammer was different. Spelljammer took place entirely on the prime material plane, but defined the prime material plane to a much higher degree. The core concepts. The prime material plane was actually an infinite sea, or an infinite ocean, three-dimensional ocean of what's called phlogiston, which isn't so much matter or energy as the potential for matter and energy. And for some reason, it was incredibly flammable. You cast Fireball, and instead of you got you cast Lightning Bolt, and at the point it started, you got and you were in the center of it. Yeah, it was bad. However, floating in the phlogiston were enormous, we're talking multiple astronomical unit, if not close to a light year, crystal shells. These crystal shells contained all the different worlds within the prime material plane. For example, inside one shell, you would find a relatively basic solar system. Sun in the center, planets orbiting, moons orbiting the planet, might have even a good old-fashioned asteroid belt in the middle. An example of this would be the Forgotten Realms. Their world is a classic solar system. However, there might be another realm. You go inside that crystal shell, and what you find is a disk that goes the entire diameter of the shell. And above it are two chariots chasing each other, one glowing like the sun, one dim like the moon. Each shell was its own world, its own realm, and it may or may not have different laws of magic depending on the deities that watched over that particular shell, but it was still, for the most part, a tangible, normal, prime material plane world. Now, how do you get from world to world? With a helm. Not helm in the sense of something you put on your head to protect it. Helm more like a ship's helm. But these were special. You take a spellcaster. He sits in the helm. His potential for magic powers it and allows an entire ship to lift off and launch off towards the crystal shells, where you could find portals outside the crystal shell and into the phlogiston. And if I remember correctly, the more powerful the caster, the faster the ship would travel. But a caster could only power a ship for so long, and so they'd take shifts. You know, kind of like just a normal ship's crew. Now, how can you take a sailing ship into space? Well, it's fantasy. No matter what you are, you have your own personal gravity plane. Yeah, I know. Just roll with it. So, for example, a wyvern goes into space. He ends up taking with him enough air because of his personal gravity to last him for a couple days. And his personal gravity would be along his line there. That's assuming he was able to get up there. So when you have a ship, I'm going to use a super glue bottle as an example. A ship has its own up and down. And it carries with it, because it's so large, enough air for its entire crew for quite some time. Now you might have to go ahead and scoop through a planet and pick up some fresh air after a while. But the problem comes when you have two ships meeting each other at different angles. The larger ship, their gravity plane takes precedence. So instead of it being like this, since this ship is much more massive, it's like this. And all the people here start falling towards the front. That's pretty much the basics. It was intended to be more swashbuckling and more exploratory. There were incredibly vast and epic things out there. There was I don't even remember the name of it, but there was a type of giant who could sit on asteroids, almost 60 feet tall, and it would think. Contemplators, I think. There were stellar dragons that were measured in percentages of astronomical units. Not feet, not miles, astronomical units. Supposedly a great worm was the star at the heart of some crystal shells. There were an entire subrace of orcs called Skro. Yeah, that's orcs backwards. That were far more intelligent and cultured than the standard. Basically, they were at least on par with most civilized races, if not on average more intelligent. So yeah, you'd roll up to what you thought was a ship full of orcs, expecting to hear, "Oi, we gonna cut you!" and then be bombarded with Shakespearean-style insults and laughter and extremely sophisticated weaponry. Oh yeah, there was gunpowder. And Lord help anyone who tried to use it in Phlogiston. So what was a campaign of Spelljammer like? Well, for the most part, like I said earlier, it was exploration. You might have a merchant campaign, wherein your purpose was going from one crystal shell to another and trading commodities. Or it could be like the campaign I was in. There are several races in Spelljammer that are explicitly noted as being slavers. Most prominently, the Illithids. Yep, mind flayers. Instead of a helm, they had Elder Brain at the center, powering it all. There were also races like the Neogi. There was the massive merchant race, the Arcane. The recently released for 5e, Gith. You know, the big hippo people with, flintlock pistols and, "I say, old chap, shall we get a move on?" Well, we had a campaign that was hunting down slavers and freeing slaves and taking them to places where slavery was illegal. Different areas of Toril, things like that. The problem came about when there really weren't as many people interested in Planescape as there were in other settings. I mean, Dark Sun, Ravenloft, settings like those just exploded in popularity, whereas Spelljammer just kind of sailed along. Some of the elements of Spelljammer were a little ridiculous. For example, the Gnomes of Krynn found a way to do without a helm. Their ships were powered by hippo-sized giant hamsters running in giant wheels. They were called giant space hamsters because they were deliberately bred that way. And there were all sorts of variant types of these giant space hamsters, including the miniature giant space hamster. Size of a normal hamster. And yes, this does mean that the famous Minsk and his animal companion Boo. Boo very well might be actually a miniature giant space hamster. It's kind of hard to maintain a gripping narrative of rating these monstrosities against nature who are enslaving other peoples when you run across a bunch of gnomes with hippo-sized hamsters powering their ships. Yeah. So we had an inconsistent tone. They also seemed to put out a lot more books than they really needed to, because it really wasn't drawing in that much of an audience. I mean, if you mention most of the great settings from 2nd edition today, a lot of people will be like, oh yeah, I remember that. We had a campaign there. But Spelljammer, not so much. You might see people go, oh yeah, I remember Spelljammer. We borrowed a couple things from it, but we never actually played in it. Or something to that effect. One of the great cardinal sins it committed, according to many game masters I knew at the time, it introduced gunpowder in a big way. It then said that it doesn't work in some crystal shells because the gods watching over those shells don't like it working. Or like in Forgotten Realms, it would work on small scale like guns, but not for cannons or explosives because we want to leave our big booms to the high-powered mages. Anyway, that's basically been an overview of the setting Spelljammer. Next time, who knows? We might take a different setting from the same time, such as the 2nd edition setting, Council of Worms. Look it up before I come back. Let's see if you remember it. And I guess that'll be all. Good night.